Oh god, the reviews for Digimon World Next Order aren't as positive this time around. Don't get me wrong, it didn't receive critical acclaim or anything like that when it originally came out in 2017, but fans and critics were nicer to it overall. I played it in 2017 and enjoyed it immensely. With it coming to both Steam and Switch, I decided to pick it up again. What do I think of it now that it is 2023? The core gameplay is very similar to Digimon World on the PS1, except now the player must take care of two Digimon. The player will have to pay attention to their fatigue meters, feed them when they're hungry, find a toilet when they have to shit, and let them sleep when they're sleepy. Basically, take the Tamagotchi and Digimon V-pads and stretch that to fill an entire game. Some of these find these types of games as annoying busy work, but if it grabs you, you'll sink a lot of time into it. The partner Digimon can digivolve into higher forms if they meet their conditions to do so. These are called key points, and usually, better Digimon will have more conditions to meet. This is where the gameplay of Next Order really shines over the original in my opinion. In the original Digimon World, the player would basically have to use a guide to get the Digimon they want. In Next Order, the player can unlock conditions for Digivolution. This will happen every so often. I'm not really sure when, but it seems to happen after training in the gym for a couple of hours, after a few fights, or when the player praises or scolds their Digimon. There are 6 main stats, which are HP, basically hit points. If this hits 0, your Digimon will be knocked out in battle. MP, when a Digimon uses an attack, their MP will be drained. Strength, when strength is higher, the attacking Digimon will deal more damage. Stamina, basically just defense. If this stat is higher, your Digimon will take less damage. Wisdom, wisdom reduces the MP cost of skills, increases the chance of guarding, and increases the critical hit ratio. Speed, this will determine how fast your Digimon attacks in battle. If the stat is high, the Digimon will have fewer pauses in between actions. Stats can be raised in a few main ways. The first one is through the gym. This will let the player pick a drill for each Digimon, and each training session takes an hour. The Digimon will also become fatigued over time, so the player will have to rest somewhat often. The player can get increased amounts of stat gains if they stop the roulette wheel on a bonus square. Additional bonus squares will appear if the player meets certain conditions. The gym is great for baby and in-training Digimon because they are ass at fighting, but one will soon find out that the gym ends up being inefficient, sadly. Another way the player can increase stats is through items like chips and restaurant food. Once you get far enough into the game, you may realize that battling is the best way to increase stats, though. This is because fights take up no in-game time, and the stat gains can be pretty massive. The best way to do this is to desync your Digimon lifespans and fight late-game Digimon. The younger Digimon will receive a boatload of stats. Speaking of combat, it has been changed pretty drastically from the original Digimon World. Every so often, the player can shout out their Digimon and they earn Next Order points for it. These can be used to either tell the Digimon to use one of their attacks, use their finish, go into a defensive stance, use their special ability, or EXE Digivolve. The EXE Digivolution can only happen once per day. I get why they did this. A lot of complaints about the original Digimon World's combat were that it felt just too hands-off. With a Digimon with lower brains, this is a fair assessment, but the player will absolutely have to pay attention in harder fights. It's more hands-on for sure, and the player has more influence on the outcome of the match than in the original. The defensive stance in general is simply OP. If the player can use the stance correctly, they will only receive 1 damage from attacks for a short amount of time. This includes finishes too. It becomes integral for harder parts of the game. It should also be noted that partner Digimon will attack by themselves too, so if the player wants to sit back, they can, but you'll probably get your ass whooped in the later fights. Each Digimon has a type that will influence what moves they can learn, and what attacks they'll be weak to. They will receive a 1.5 damage multiplier if they get hit by one of these moves. There are also 7 status abnormalities that will make fighting harder. Poison will gradually take HP, Slow will slow down Digimon significantly, and my favorite one, Sprite, will turn the Digimon into their V-Pet form where they can only do a basic attack. The player can toss items at their Digimon to help them out in battle. You got the basic stuff like HP, MP, status abnormality remedies. The big ones though are the utility plugins. You basically need these for late game Digimon. These will temporarily boost your Digimon stats until the end of the fight. The player's Digimon can learn techniques by watching opponents use techniques. It's way easier to fill out the technique chart because any Digimon can learn any move. In the original, you would need a Digimon that can learn DG Dimension in order to actually learn DG Dimension. Here though, any Digimon can fill out the chart on their own. It makes it easier, but this was such a huge pain in the ass in the original, so I don't mind it. Don't get too attached to your Digimon though. They will die. Lifespans depend on what mode the player is playing and what stage of Digimon the player is able to achieve. On easy mode, I found that Megas will live to be roughly 20 years old. A lot of Digimon World haters bring up the fact that this is stupid that Digimon die. I don't mind this at all. Every new generation of Digimon gets easier to raise because they will inherit some stats from the last generation. The facilities around the city will get better and will help the player raise the new Digimon. For example, the gym equipment will get better, the restaurant will serve food that raises stats, and the farm can plant multiple crops. On top of that, having Digimon die will force the player to move on, and will encourage them to raise new types of Digimon. I guess I get where these people are coming from, but once you know what you are doing, the death mechanic isn't an issue. I think it's an integral part of the gameplay. The game would be just ruined without it. The game was developed and designed with this mechanic in mind. Just straight up removing it, like I've seen a lot of people mention, that will just trivialize the game. One way that this game straight up improves over the original Digimon World is the fact that the player can get experience and buy skills. Some of these skills are game changers, and some of my favorites include healing HP and MP while walking, being able to learn moves easier, being able to take a defensive stance, throwing items to your Digimon for free, having the chance to half the next order point requirement for an action, increasing your Digimon's life. There's a lot to this. In the original, the tamer themselves really never got better, if you know what I mean. Sure, their tamer level goes up, which will increase the newborn Digimon stats, but that was it, really. Another huge game changer is the fact that the player can block Digivolution paths. One common frustration that I hear with the original game is the fact that it's too easy to get repeats. I completely get that complaint because there's really no way of knowing what Digimon you'll get unless you have a guide on you. Once a player gets far enough, they'll unlock the Digivolution Dojo, which will not only let them block paths, but will also give them additional credentials to evolutions in exchange for Digivolution items. The player can also undergo EXE Digivolution by either using both their Digimon, or only using one and using a city resident as the other. This is a neat way to get Super Megas, but they can't EXE Digivolve in battle. I personally say keep them as Megas until you finish all the S-rank battles in the Coliseum. They'll get an extra life boost, a stronger finish, and some extra stats. So it could be a good trade-off if one doesn't need the in-battle EXE Digivolution. Recruiting Digimon to the city and figuring out what they do to help the player is still good fun. Going to the city and seeing new shops open up still feels like you're doing the digital world justice. It doesn't quite have the same effect as in the original, because at a certain point, the city just expands like 50 times just because you hit a certain point in the story. Some will call this a nitpick for sure, but I feel like the city building aspect, while good, was not as good as in the original. I also appreciate the idea of gathering materials to further improve the city, but that has its own problems that I'll get into later. I thought that the world and the music itself were so nice. Some spots may be too big and empty for their own good, like Boney Resort, but I like the visual and audio differences in the world. Jumping from the hot as shit Logic Volcano, to the ice cold Absolute Zero, to the calm Nigh Plains, to the pirate themed Mod Cape, to the Mount Infinity influence Infinite Cauldron, it's pretty cool. These places have their own enemies and themes that distinguish themselves from one another and genuinely feel different from one another. I also love the Digital World narrative as the developers crammed a bunch of technology-related references into the world itself. The player will run around giant capacitors, wires in the ground, circuit boards, and computer chips. As a technology nerd, as well as someone who always loved the digital world as a concept, this is something that I enjoy and pay more attention to than I should. When I look around, I see most people say that the world is boring. They may just be comparing it to the original Digimon World too much. I honestly can't tell if it's just the nostalgia, but something about the original Digimon World's File Island is so goddamn fascinating and is such a joy to revisit. Most of these places have different musical themes for night and day, which is greatly appreciated. The music in general is just so good. There are plenty of references to the original game as well. File City Day and Night make an appearance, and the boss battle theme is also a good callback to the original Digimon World. The new tracks are still very good too. Faulty Ex Machina, Mod Cape, and Nigh Plains are some examples of strong musical tracks to me. There are also some other smaller things I'd like to put here. The tent is awesome. The tent will let the player take a rest while away from the city, which is great. It will also let the player pack up materials that they gathered to make more room. Having two Digimon will let the player fill out the field guide quickly. The revamped Coliseum is actually pretty difficult, especially the Rookie Challenge. There are 70 challenges in total, and these get brutally difficult by the end. It got to a point where I just abused the EXE Digivolutions in battle. The post-game dungeons are fun to run through the first few times. The Royal Knights will help the player, giving them things like more materials, more life, more bits, tamer experience, or more time in the dungeons. You can get your Digimon's life to 99 days by doing this. The dimensions will end with a fight against a strong Mega, like Machinedramon, Loosemon, Armageddonmon, just for example. I love how they handle these Digimon coming to the city. They truly feel powerful and help the player in extreme ways. What are the changes from the PS4 version to the new release on Switch and PC? Wait for it. A run button. Yes, they actually use that shit for marketing. Don't get me wrong, the world is a bit too big at times, so this is a genuinely good feature. Some places like Boney Resort are just straight up annoying to get around because it is needlessly too big. When sprinting, the player goes 1.4 times as fast. It may not sound like much, but trust me, the sprinting is nice. There is also a new beginner mode. I personally can't say too much because I played on easy mode. I thought that normal was way too grindy, while beginner was a bit too easy. From my understanding, beginner mode makes enemies a bit weaker. I'm honestly not sure, and I'm annoyed that this answer isn't easier to find. I know that normal mode makes the game a bigger grind by reducing stat raises from the gym, but I'm pretty sure that beginner and easy give the same stat gains. This is a welcome change though, as the game is a huge grind at times. Other than that, I really can't think of anything. This really was a basic port thrown onto Steam and Switch for a quick buck. I bought it because I love the Digimon World formula, but if one expected more of a $60 port, I don't blame you. At least we got all the DLC, but like, that's borderline mandatory at this price point, right? So what are some things that I'm not a fan of? The story is pure buns. I can appreciate the fact that there are plenty of Digimon World callbacks. For example, the player had to fight several Machinedramon throughout the game. Mameo will also appear throughout the story, and that's a neat nod. However, the pacing just feels so off to me. The game will just dump dialogue at the player and it gets irritating quickly. I love the mystery behind the original Digimon world and how details were broken up when certain Digimon were bumped into. There are just so many times when the game forces the player to go to Digimon's house and just get bombarded with dialogue. If the story of the game was actually good, I wouldn't mind it too much. There is just so much dialogue that is outright weird, unnecessary, or dare I use the overused word, cringy. Speaking of pacing, the enemies are also whack. There are times you stay in your lane, and you're all good. Then you go one screen over, and get completely demolished. Like the opponent does thousands of damage over your maximum health demolished. The Digimon have levels that are supposed to help with that. The problem is that rookies, champions, ultimates, and megas, they all have their own level. And if you mistake a mega for an ultimate, let's just say things get bad pretty quickly. One thing that I love about Digimon World is how much you can get done with your first rookie or champion. There are so many Digimon that you can recruit to the city if you know what you're doing. Next Order seems to have an arbitrary strength limit at times. That's also not to mention that a lot of recruitable Digimon, they won't even talk to the player if their prosperity isn't high enough. I get that it's a personal thing, but I love how Digimon World, it just felt way more open. There were a few roadblocks, like Saolomon having to fix the bridge, or having Dromodramon drill a tunnel, but Next Orders are really restrictive, arbitrary, and lame. Getting materials is also such a damn pain in the ass. Here's an unedited clip of me extracting a spot 5 times. This sucks because the idea of gathering materials in addition to recruiting Digimon to make the city the best that it can be is such a good idea in theory, but I swear man, they found like the most annoying way to do it. There's an odd delay after mining every time, and you gotta watch your Digimon do an animation. It just gets so old so quickly. That's not to mention the player can't even hold that many materials at a time. They are also tied cards into this bullshit, meaning that going for all the cards will add a considerable amount of playtime. Those are the big complaints. I could talk about that price point though. $60 for this game in 2023 is kind of absurd. It's a glorified 2016 PS Vita game that got major work done on it and released it for the PS4 in 2017. That talking point is probably overdone at this point. The English voices could use some work too. Some of the graphics are straight up ugly, and the roster is full of recolors while they're missing some of my favorite Digimon like Digitamamon and Bakumon. I could pick some more nitpicky things, but I'll stop there. It took me roughly 35 hours or so to beat the main game, but trust me, there is way too much stuff to dive into after that. For the sake of not having 100 plus hours of footage to comb through, I didn't record much of the post game. Just know that when I completed the main game, I had a prosperity of around 100. However, the prosperity of the city can get all the way to 200. Doing a true 100% run is truly a nightmare. I alluded to this earlier, but getting all the cards, as well as maxing out all facilities with the builder, and maxing out the Timber rank are the 3 worst culprits of this by far. It should also be mentioned that Next Order works pretty well on the Steam Deck. Since this is a grindy game in general, I sunk a lot of time on the deck. Sometimes I'd be running through the post-game dungeons, other times I'd be trying to get the stupid-ass cards, and other times I'd just be raising stats or filling out the field guide. It didn't work right away for me though. I had to force it to launch with Proton 6.3-8. Others were claiming that they didn't need to do that and it just worked right out of the box, so I'm not sure why I had problems. Once it worked though, it ran pretty great. Stutters here and there, sure, but it ran at a pretty consistent 60 FPS, and it only crashed once. So that's Digimon World Next Order. It's nice that Digimon World actually got a sequel that was released in the West. It coming to Steam was a nice excuse to get back into it, and I'm currently working on getting all achievements. I've played roughly 75, 76 hours, and here's to many more. Yeah, some things definitely bother me, like getting all the cards was a nightmare, the pacing can be a bit annoying, the drawn-out story hurts its replayability, that price point is pretty damn high, gathering materials is a pain in the ass, and it does get pretty grindy. Despite all of this, I somehow still love Digimon World Next Order, and I hope that the Digimon World series can continue and learn from this game's mistakes. A 6 out of 7, I guess.